In the previous lesson, we explored how the Arizona Department of Real Estate, ADRE, regulates Title IV, Chapter 28 of the Arizona Administrative Code, AAC, often referred to as the Commissioner's Rules. These rules give life to the statutes found in Title 32, Chapter 20 of the Arizona Revised Statutes, ARS, ensuring consistency and accountability across the real estate industry. However, laws and rules cannot anticipate every unique situation that arises in the real world. As industries evolve, new technologies, business models, and ethical questions emerge that may not be directly addressed in existing statutes or administrative rules. To provide clarity and ensure uniform interpretation of the law, the ADRA and other state agencies issue Substantive Policy Statements, SPS. Substantive policy statements serve as official agency guidance. They interpret how an agency applies or enforces certain statutes or rules, ensuring that licensees, educators, and the public understand the agency's expectations. For real estate professionals, understanding what an SPS is and how it affects daily practice is essential to maintaining compliance and professionalism. Definition and purpose of a substantive policy statement. A substantive policy statement, SPS, is a written document issued by a state agency to explain its current approach or interpretation of a rule or statute. It is not a new law or rule, but an explanation of how the agency interprets or enforces existing law. The authority for agencies to issue substantive policy statements comes from the Arizona Administrative Procedure Act, ARS Title 41, Chapter 6, which governs rulemaking and administrative operations. According to ARS Section 41-1001, a substantive policy statement is advisory only and does not include internal procedural documents. In simpler terms, it is guidance, not a legally binding rule, but it holds significant weight because it reflects how the agency will apply or enforce a particular provision of law. The primary purposes of a substantive policy statement are clarity, to explain how a law or rule applies to specific circumstances; consistency, to ensure all licensees are treated fairly and held to the same interpretation of the law; transparency, to inform the public and industry professionals of the agency's stance on certain issues; education, to guide compliance and prevent violations before they occur. How state agencies create substantive policy statements. Unlike formal rules, substantive policy statements do not require the lengthy rulemaking process outlined in the Administrative Procedure Act. However, they must still follow specific standards to ensure fairness and transparency. The process typically includes 1. Identification of need. A state agency identifies an area of confusion, inconsistency, or frequent inquiry among professionals or the public. For example, the ADRE might notice that brokers and agents have differing interpretations of what constitutes an acceptable electronic signature on a real estate document. 2. Legal review and drafting. The agency's legal or policy division drafts the substantive policy statement. It must clearly reference the specific statutes or rules being interpreted and explain how the agency views or applies them in practice. 3rd, internal review and approval. Before issuance, the policy statement is reviewed internally by the agency's legal counsel and approved by the department's leadership, such as the real estate commissioner in the case of the ADRE4. Public release and publication. Once approved, the statement is made available to the public. Agencies typically post these documents on their websites or in the Arizona Administrative Register, ensuring licensees and the public can access them. 5. Application and use. Once issued, the SPS serves as the agency's official interpretation until it is modified, replaced, or withdrawn. Licensees are expected to comply with the interpretation outlined, as it reflects how the agency will evaluate conduct during audits, investigations, or disciplinary proceedings. Example, ADRE, Substantive Policy Statement Number 2005.101 of the most referenced examples in Arizona real estate is Substantive Policy Statement Number 2005.10, which addresses electronic signatures. When electronic signature technology began gaining popularity, many licensees were unsure whether digital or scanned signatures were legally acceptable for real estate documents. To clarify this issue, the ADRE issued SPS number 2005.10, affirming that electronic signatures are valid and enforceable. Under Chapter 26, Article 1, ARS Section 44-7001-ARS Section 44-7061 ETCQ, known as the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act UETA. This policy statement provided clarity for brokers, agents, and escrow officers, confirming that electronically signed real estate contracts, listing agreements, and addenda were legally binding, as long as they complied with UETA standards. While this SPS did not create a new rule, it effectively standardized practice across the industry and prevented inconsistent application of the law. Importance of substantive policy statements. Substantive policy statements play a vital role in bridging the gap between formal legislation and everyday professional practice. For real estate licensees, they provide clear interpretation. They explain how ADRE interprets specific statutes or rules, removing ambiguity and uncertainty. Promote compliance. By understanding agency expectations, licensees can align their business practices with ADRE standards, reducing the risk of violations. Enhance consistency. All licensees are held to the same interpretation of the law, ensuring fair and equal treatment across the industry. Support education. Real estate schools and instructors use SPS documents to teach current, accurate interpretations of the law. Adapt to industry change. As technology, marketing methods, and consumer protection standards evolve, the ADRE can issue policy statements faster than new legislation can be enacted, keeping regulations current. Example, if the ADRE observes growing use of artificial intelligence (AI) in real estate marketing, it may issue a future substantive policy statement explaining how R4-28-502E advertising rules applies to AI-generated content. This would clarify the acceptable use of such tools before any formal rule is adopted. Substantive policy statements versus rules. It's important to understand how substantive policy statements differ from formal rules. Feature Substantive Policy Statement, SPS, Administrative Rule, AAC, created by state agency, e.g., ADRE, state agency under formal rulemaking authority, legal status advisory. Interpretive guidance, legally binding and enforceable approval process. Internal agency approval. No GRRC review must go through the public rulemaking process, and Governor's Regulatory Review Council, GRRC, purpose. Clarifies how the agency interprets laws or rules, establishes new requirements or procedures. Example, ADRESPS number 2005.10. Electronic signatures. R4-28-1101. Professional conduct standards. Both tools are essential. Rules create the regulatory foundation. Policy statements provide clarity and guidance for their application. Review summary. In this section, you learn that substantive policy statements, SPS, are written interpretations issued by state agencies like the Arizona Department of Real Estate to clarify how existing laws or rules are applied. Key takeaways include substantive policy statements, SPS documents, provide transparency and consistency in how laws are enforced. They do not create new laws, but explain how agencies interpret existing statutes or rules. The process of issuing an SPS involves identifying a need, drafting the interpretation, internal review, and public release. SPS documents help licensees stay compliant by clarifying gray areas of law and providing guidance on new or evolving issues. A key example is ADRESPS number 2005.10, which confirmed the legality of electronic signatures in Arizona real estate transactions. Substantive policy statements give licensees the insight needed to operate confidently within Arizona's real estate regulatory system. Discussion 1. What is the purpose of a substantive policy statement? Answer. To explain how a state agency interprets and enforces existing laws or rules, providing guidance and consistency for licensees and the public. 2. Are substantive policy statements legally binding like administrative rules? Answer. No. They are advisory only, but they reflect how the agency will interpret and apply the law in enforcement actions. 3. What statute defines and authorizes substantive policy statements? Answer. ARS Section 41-1001 under the Arizona Administrative Procedure Act. 4. Why might an agency issue a substantive policy statement instead of creating a new rule? Answer. Because issuing an SPS is faster, more flexible, and allows the agency to clarify issues or respond to new industry practices without going through the lengthy, formal rulemaking process. 5. What is an example of an ADRE substantive policy statement that affects licensees? Answer. SPS number 2005.10, which clarified that electronic signatures are legally valid in Arizona real estate transactions. Closing remarks. Substantive policy statements are one of the most effective tools the Arizona Department of Real Estate uses to communicate expectations, interpret the law, and guide licensees through changing times. They ensure that both new and experienced professionals understand how to apply the law in practice, even when the industry evolves faster than legislation can keep pace. By staying informed about current SPS documents, licensees can anticipate the ADRE's enforcement approach, minimize compliance risks, and maintain the highest professional standards. In the next section, we will explore Arizona case law, where judicial decisions interpret statutes, administrative rules, and sometimes even the substantive policy statements themselves, providing the final layer of legal authority within Arizona's real estate system.